Fearscape Media Network, exploring the unknown, one podcast at a time.
Support for the Fearscape Media Network is brought to you by Manscaped, the best in men's below-the-waist grooming champions of the world. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped just launched their 4th-generation trimmer, the Lawnmower 4.0. You heard that right, the 4.0. Join over 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer just for you. 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code FEARSCAPE at manscaped.com.
Hi, do you enjoy diving into true crime
and tales of the paranormal?
Then join us. I'm Anna.
And I'm Lindsay on our podcast, Ghosts in the Attic, Bodies in the Basement,
a Fearscape Media Network podcast.
New episodes air every other Friday on wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Coming to you from nowhere, a suburb of parts unknown, your ghoulish hosts for an evening of terror, Stefan Gearhart and Lance Wayne, the Misters of the Dark.
Good evening, dear friends, and welcome to another terrifying episode of Misters of the Dark, the greatest horror podcast in the history of horror podcasting. As always, we're beaming directly to you from nowhere, a suburb of parts unknown, and I am your head mister, Lord Stefan Gearhart.
The Man with No Name, Lance Wayne's Journal, December 7th, 2021. I am your co-mister, the Man with No Name, Lance Wayne.
Okay, so we're still doing this, huh?
Stefan looks at me angrily. This has become a common occurrence since beginning this journal. Mem needs to learn how to write.
Okay, well, as always, dear friends, I suppose you're owed some sort of explanation as to why my quarter brother is being more irritating than usual.
The journal continued. Stefan may not realize this, but words do hurt.
Well, they can't hurt you any worse than I'm gonna if you don't cut this crap out. Sigh. Okay, sigh. Anyway, dear friends, we were given the delightful opportunity to read the lost journals of Bram Stoker, the Dublin years, and being as impressionable as he is, Lance decided to start keeping a journal of his own.
The journal continued. I don't care much for Stefan's tone right now. The arrogant bastard. I shall very much like to kill him in the near future.
Okay, well, remember, if you say it out loud, it's considered premeditated. Dear friends, help us in welcoming the author from Hellbound Books, Dacre Stoker. All right, Dacre Stoker, thank you so much for coming out to the dilapidated mansion, joining Lance and myself here. We're very, very excited to have you come on over. We appreciate you.
Well, thank you, guys. Thanks for having me. You know, first time on Misters of the Dark podcast, so I'm ready. This is the time of the year, you know, where the Stokers, I'd say shine, but that's not quite the right word, you know.
Dampen.
You know, we're hiding. Yeah. Damp. Exactly. You know, this is it.
Where the Stoker shadows get darker.
That's it. The shadows lengthen. How about that?
I like that a lot.
They'll drive you batty.
It'll drive.
Oh, come on.
Good one.
Oh, the puns have already started. But yeah, we're super excited, man. We're big fans of the undead, Dracula the Undead, and Dracul as well. And so to find out that you were writing this, getting these lost journals and all these journals together, was really exciting because Lance and I are both Bram Stoker fans more than just Dracula. I mean, we're huge fans of all the other writings, and it was very incredible to read this book and just see all the influences on everything outside of Dracula.
Well, it's a really interesting find, guys, because first of all, I appreciate you guys giving a plug to the two fictional works, but I'm guided by the research that I do and I do with others. Bram Stoker does have two great grandsons still alive, and they've got some cool stuff, and they've given some cool stuff to Trinity College in Dublin, where Bram went to university, in their archives. And I've connected with lots of different places. The Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia have Bram's notes. Actually, the Paul Allen Estate, the co-founder of Microsoft, actually has the Dracula typescript. But finding this actual lost journal in my cousin's attic in the Isle of Wight was really a cool contribution. And I figured, this has to be done right. So I got Dr. Elizabeth Miller, who is one of the foremost Dracula experts, to come on board. First of all, to help decipher Bram's horrible handwriting. There was I'm telling you, this is like hieroglyphics, 310 entries, spread over 11 years. And he was, just jotting stuff down. It wasn't meant to be like a diary, like, this is what I did today. Went on a really cool podcast, with Stefan and Lance. Well, I would write that now. I would write that.
When did those journals get published?
Well, hey, I hope it's not after I die, like Bram. Right? This is what it was. Everybody's looking. All Draculas are looking for something relevant that Bram says about himself or his writing process, and there is none. This is the closest thing. There was the Dracula notes, as I said, the typescript has been found, but not him himself talking about, what I found. And so what this journal is all about, and since you've looked through it, you'll see it, is he is just jotting down observations, ideas, random thoughts, things that he thinks of when seeing other things over 11 years. And then later on, they make their way into not just Dracula, but some of the other books he wrote, some of the speeches he gives, some of the toasts he gives, and just funny crap that he just thinks is cool. I mean, drunken parties that they have at the, these government house where people are like finding a drunk guy to get him to throw up so you can gator, slide through the guy. I mean, this is Ireland after all, So there's some cool stuff in this book. Very cool stuff.
Yeah. Because I remember I read a book, it's been a couple of years ago. It was called Hollywood Gothic. I forget.
David Scull.
David Scull, yes. Yeah. I've read a couple of his works, actually. And he talked a little bit about Bram, and actually bring it up in the journals that sometimes when people bring up Bram, they almost bring him up almost like he was a curmudgeon or something. Like he was...
Thank you, because it's so far from the truth.
Yeah,
we've now, we find, since he left no autobiography, and the biographies that people have done have only been as good as what material they find. Right. And the Lost Journal is one of these things that, nobody has written a biography using the Lost Journal to personalize Bram. Since then, I've also found newspaper accounts in Cruden Bay, Scotland, where Bram spent 11 summers. And that's where he wrote Dracula and 2 other books. And they said he was really a very funny, jovial guy. Yeah. He mixed with everybody, but you assume that he's this dark, demented person because, Edgar Allan Poe and Lovecraft, these guys who wrote similar, really cool horror, were kind of screwed up people. And Bram was a very normal guy. He was a theater manager. He was worked as a clerk in the Dublin Castle in British government. He was very normal. He just had an incredible dark sense of imagination that was the result of some weird stuff that happened in his childhood and then really good research later on.
Yeah, actually, I have it written down in my notes. A quote from Henry Dickens, son of Charles, had a laugh that was good to hear. So I mean that guy does. You hear something like that. That guy doesn't really sound like the grumpy old
Like old man Dracula at the front of the book, right?
Yeah. That sounds like somebody you'd want to be around.
He was, and in the journal we've got a whole section. What Elizabeth and I did was we took the 310 entries and grouped them based on what suited us, essentially, to make commentary. And one of them was humor. And I mean, Bram had a very dry Irish wit, and he found lots of things very funny. And so, we found a good place to put that in the book to show that more jovial, humorous side of a good Irish storyteller. And there was also some really dark stuff as well. Let's be honest. One of the cool things, and it's really one of the heavier parts in there, and I've got to say it in the show, is a friend of his who he went to college with, a guy by the name of Delaney, was a classmate of his at Trinity College, and Bram observed a massive fire in Dublin. You were talking the late 1800s, so everything was wood, right? Yeah. So there was a fire at Delaney's. This was in the notes. Servant's hand in coffin. And I thought, oh my God, I've just found something really cool about Dracula. It wasn't. What it was even worse. That this was not long after the fire crews in Dublin had invented the extension ladder. So people who were observing this fire from outside, the Delaney's actually had a taxidermy store, and then they lived up above it. And of course, taxidermists had all the weird chemicals, very volatile chemicals. So this stuff burned like crazy. The fire was out of control fast. But everybody gathering around the streets saying, oh, just wait. It's okay. The fire crew's coming. They'll bring the new ladders. Just wait. Because normally what they do is climb out the windows at great risk, climb up or over and get away. No, wait for them. Well, along came the fire crews, and up goes the new extension ladders, and they all fell. They fell apart. They didn't work.
Lord.
Wow.
So these people who were waiting and thought they had this false sense of security were incinerated, and the only thing found of their bodies was the hand of the servant was left in the coffin. That was the only thing left of the body. So Bram made that comment, and he put a date on that entry. So when I researched that, my wife and I dug, and we found the newspaper article that was actually focused on the fire at the Delaney's house, which caused a massive inquiry into the Dublin fire crew and how these poor, ladders just screwed up. So that's the type of thing. And later on, he would have used stuff like that. He didn't use this in a book that was obviously too sensitive and too horrifying and too real, but that's what he did. Weird observations, weird stuff, but dark and heavy stuff as well.
Yeah. Well, I just like you were saying, it does get pretty dark, because I believe his first short story, The Crystal Cup, it's about it, and I think you touch upon it in the journals. You say it's about an imprisoned artist, and that's how Bram felt most of his life. His father was very typical, no, art isn't, you can't make money with art. This is the way.
I'm so glad not a lot of people actually touch on that, Lance. I'm glad you did, because I'm really proud of some cool stuff Bram's done. But he was actually a founding member of the Dublin Painting and Sketching Club, which still is active today. So there was a side of Bram that was very atypical of the rest of the family. Bram's dad was a civil servant for 50 years, probably a pretty dull, boring guy, He had 3 brothers who were scientists who became, and my great-grandfather was one of them, very, very well-known doctor. One other brother, a civil servant. His 2 sisters, though, were artists. And Bram was the only one that kind of gravitated towards literature, and he was kind of slapped down by his father when he told his father in a letter he's going to write a play for this famous Cuban-American actress, Genevieve Ward. And he got beat down by that, which I'm sure was crushing to him. Yeah. But it was kind of like saying, no, son, I got you a job at Dublin Castle. Stick here. And for a creative guy like him, he was like crushed. And so his response, he would sneak out, and he had a deal with Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, who run who wrote Carmilla, the vampire story, but he was running the Dublin Evening Post, and Bram was got a free gig to write theatrical reviews. And so he got to sneak out of his castle, like, you know, Jonathan Harker escaping the castle. And flex his artistic side that his father was suppressing. And he got to go off and get into the theater that way, which led him to his big job dream come true when he met Henry Irving as a result of but you're right, The Crystal Cup was about an apprentice and artist. I'm sure a lot of things that Bram wrote, especially in the early years, were semi-autobiographical. You can see Bram in them. Hell, you can see Bram Stoker in Jonathan Harker. It doesn't take much to look at that young lawyer. Bram himself was called to the bar to be a lawyer. He said, no, thanks. I don't want to take the test. I've got a great job as a theatrical manager, but he slides himself, Lance, just like you said, into these stories. So if you know how to look and where to look, you can get a pretty good idea about how Bram is wired. And this Lost Journal is a good place to start too.
Well, I feel like such a dummy because, you know, I've read Dracula countless times over the years. I'm actually reading this made me go back. I'm listening to audio adaptation on Spotify at the moment. And I felt like such a dummy because even the way Jonathan Harker, it's Jonathan Harker. I don't know about the other characters, but, you know, the way Jonathan Harker writes the journal entries, it's the exact same way Bram wrote his, with the mem, with the reminders and things like that. Blew my mind. Like I said, this is probably it was probably something staring me right in the face the whole time, but I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, no, a lot of folks don't get that the first time round, and I meet people all over the world when I do my talks on Bram Stoker and his life and his writings, and then I plugging my books as well. It's like I've met so many people that read Dracula once and then watch movies, but then come back and read it again 5 or 10 years later. Yeah, because it's not an easy read. And when you do slow down, if you have to read it in high school or college, you're going to get the Monarch notes, you're going to get the Cliff notes, and you're going to get nothing. But if you take time to really read it, you find these little things like mem, must get recipe for Mina, and you look in this Lost Journal, mem this, mem this.
It was insane.
It's Bram, and Bram is Harker, and the two are interchangeable.
I was one of the with me and Stefan, we were the weird kids. We read we read Dracula and Frankenstein and stuff all on our own.
Yeah, way before school tried to make us.
Who needs girls when you can stay in and read about the undead?
Amen. Amen.
I lived that at 33.
So just to kind of sidebar just a little bit, because I do want to come back to the journals, but I'm curious as to your relation to Bram and your discovery of that. Is it something you always knew about, or was it like an ancestry thing where you're like, I always wondered. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I get many different versions of that question. How did you know? When did you know? Right. and I usually say, it was in the delivery room when I came out of the womb, and there was the doctor holding the crucifix. Like, here's another one. And I say, well, hey, Mom, what's going on? But no, seriously, I was like probably the age of 10 or 11, something like that, growing up in Montreal, Canada. And, Halloween back in the 70s, Dracula was still all over the place. I mean, it was huge from the Hammer films.
Yeah, especially the Hammer films. Yeah.
Yeah, that was huge. But I didn't really get the connection. I was a little too young. I hadn't read it at that stage. And people would come to the door, friends of mine, and they'd be joking, the Stoker's house, what are you going to do? Right. Give us candy or take our blood? And I was like, I finally said, Dad, what's going on? What's this all about? And I was kind of like embarrassed to have to ask that question because you should know the answer, kid. And he finally took me downstairs to our library, and he went into the bookshelf and took down a first edition of Dracula. And he said, well, let me show you this. And it was actually an edition that Bram had signed to his mother the day before Dracula was published. It's May 25th, 1897. And then underneath that signature, because Bram signed it to my mom, and then it was Richard Stoker, who was one of Bram's other brothers, and then Richard's wife signed it, the dates and the locations. They actually went to British Columbia, Canada, where they left Ireland and went there. And years later, when I figured out through Ancestry.com, where they were, what years, somehow Florence Stoker must have sent the book over or given the book to Richard. Hey, take the book. It's your brother's. It's a good story. You like to read it on the boat. And then when he died, he must have given it to, Susan Stoker must have inherited it because she signed it with the date once Richard had died. And then somehow it made its way all the way over to Montreal, Canada. She must, maybe their belongings were sent over, whatever, because they didn't have any kids. And so that's when Dad kind of said, look, your great grandfather, George Stoker, was Bram's youngest brother. And his son, Thornley Stoker, Tom Thornley Stoker, came over to Canada after World War I. And that's how the Irish Stokers immigrated to Canada. And then, of course, the other side of Canada was Richard in British Columbia. So we sort of joke and we call it my great-grandfather and the other great-granduncle were the bookends of Canada, and we all filled in between.
Nice.
So
nice.
But there was not much known, guys, back in the 70s. You mentioned David Scull, but the first guys that did anything were two Boston College professors, McNally and Florescu. One was Romanian, one was American, and they wrote a book called In Search of Dracula, which was really a big kickoff to understanding who the heck Vlad the Impaler was, what Bram Stoker was doing. They actually were the ones that discovered his 125 pages of notes, kind of like I found the journal. They found the Dracula notes sitting in a museum in Philadelphia.
Is that the same thing the documentary was based off of?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Okay. Then, I'm familiar with the doc at least.
So those guys, that book was kind of like my early education into my family.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Wow.
It is.
It's funny because that book you've got that's signed by everyone, it's like a family Bible, except for it's Dracula. It's the Stoker Bible. What do you expect?
Yeah.
But you guys have probably in your worlds have come up with, you met lots of people who are related to or celebrities, and you kind of say, what's it like? But and I bet you a lot of them are like, well, I'm very proud of them, but I don't have a leg to stand on. I'm not trying to be like Bram, and don't treat me any differently because I happen to be lucky enough to be his great grand nephew. My job, and I take it seriously, is to promote the guy because his creation seems to have eclipsed him, the creator.
Yeah.
100.
And it's going to be 100. The book is going to be 125 years old next year.
Yeah, that's so crazy.
Oh my gosh.
So crazy.
So who better than the great grandnephew who's done a ton of research, written some international bestsellers to keep promoting Bram so people can understand him. And I'm proud of it. I've been able to get 2 bronze busts of Bram. A friend of mine's an artist. We did Kickstarter. One is in the Dublin Writers Museum. One is in Paul Allen's the Museum of Popular Culture that he's a major benefactor of out in Seattle. We've got a festival now in Dublin, Ireland, the Bram Stoker Festival that Dublin City Council runs. That's been going for 10 years. So we finally are getting, Bram is rising above the ashes, so to speak. So people recognize him for, yes, he was the author of Dracula, but other writings as well, and what kind of a person he was. And that's what I take seriously, and I'm really proud of now.
I am too, and I'm glad that there is a resurgence. Just like Lovecraft. Lovecraft has had a huge resurgence over the last decade or so, and I liked seeing Bram starting to come back around and people visiting more than just Dracula. Because for example, the Jewel of the Seven Stars, that's my favorite story. Of course, I mean, outside of Dracula, you can't not love Dracula, but I love that story. And I just introduced my sister to Lair of the White Worm, and just a number of other things. And it's great to even see the non-horror stuff kind of getting retouched again as well. Because you think about like a book of Poe, what do you see in there? But all his stories, plus all his letters and all of his things and all that stuff. I cannot wait for the day when we get that full compendium, right? With the journals that you guys have, with the letters, with all the stories and the half-written stories and all of those things, all in this giant, beautiful compendium. It's great to see the love for Bram coming again more than just Dracula. And I know you have a lot to do with that, and I thank you for that.
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you something that just happened in the last month or so, which is really cool. And it does go to your point, Stefan, that his importance is raised. Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and I live in South Carolina, not too far from Atlanta. I don't know how much they paid, but they purchased the largest private collection of Bram Stoker / Dracula books in the world.
Random.
When I say private, fandom, but the fellow that had collected this, I knew him very well. Just because of privacy, I won't say his name on the air, but I researched this guy's collection. I had access to this for a few years, and it's incredible. Over 1,500 different books, letters, all kinds of stuff. But when you consider that a university in this day and age saw the importance of buying that whole collection, because this fellow was getting on in his years and he was concerned, he wanted the thing to stay together, that they paid, many zeros, I'm sure, for this. But what's cool is their kind of doctrine is they're going to digitize everything so that it's available to the public. Right. You don't have to fly to Atlanta and get a secret password and only be, some guy with a PhD into your name
right.
to look at it. You can go see this stuff, and it's the cool, as both you guys mentioned, reading letters between Bram Stoker and Arthur Conan Doyle, Bram Stoker and Pamela Colman Smith, all these cool people tied up in the literati, in the occult. That's what's so cool, is figuring out what the heck is going on in their minds. Again, Dracula's cool, but getting to know everything in their life, what was going on, what's relevant, what's important, the dark side of things, to me, Order of the Golden Dawn, Freemasonry, all these cool secrets. That's cool stuff.
Yes, it is, man. Yeah. I love Golden Dawn stuff. And it is constantly surprising to me, the people that were involved with Golden Dawn. It's absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
Or even later, the OTO, like any of that. It's really cool stuff, man. But I like that. I had not heard that term literati, but I will be adding that to my lexicon.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I'm going to pull that out at parties.
Oh man. So we had talked about 125 years is coming up for Dracula. It's crazy. And I know that there's some events going to be happening and you're going to be taking part of those too. Is that correct?
Yeah. Like if, fingers crossed with the pandemic and how, which wave we'll be riding next year.
Right.
But, I've been working with a travel company from Sweden, two sisters who actually are from Romania originally. They run a travel company called Experience Transylvania, and I've been running tours to Romania to go visit places associated with Vlad the Impaler and also Count Dracula. So the fictional guy as well as the factual guy. And I take it upon myself to kind of show people a really good time with the real guy and let them know he's not a vampire, and it wasn't only just my great-granduncle that turned their hero into a vampire, but he's got a really cool history. It's like holding back the Ottoman Empire with like 40,000 people against an army of 400,000 for 7.5 years. And like, good thing you've got the Carpathian Mountains, because really geographic, strategic geographic locations of this massive L-shaped mountain range. And also their version of the Florida Everglades, which is the Danube Delta, stopped the mighty power of the Ottomans and their gunpowder and their cannons coming into Christian Europe. And they were thwarted over time, not only by the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, but little old Vlad the Impaler, because of these tiny mountain passes and these guerrilla tactics that he used. He's a hero. But Bram saw his name in 2 books when he was doing his research and turned him into, Dracula, Count Dracula, because he was referred to as being the devil. And it wasn't because he was fighting the Ottomans per se. That was nice extra dose of history. Yeah. But he was known as the devil because of the atrocities that he, the skinning of people, the impaling of people, all this horrible stuff he did. But he had to do that. That was like the sign of the times, and that was how you stay relevant. So we go to those sites, and we also go to the sites where the book is. I mean, Bram looked at travel journals. You could take a tour replicating Jonathan Harker's trip because Bram was so accurate. So we do that, and we also are branching into going to the places in England where Bram wrote Dracula and where he placed parts of Dracula. And to me, I don't know if you guys have ever been there, but chapter 6, 7, and 8 of Dracula are written in one of the coolest towns called Whitby in Yorkshire. And it is a place where Bram went for one holiday, but he was so blown away by it that he changed where he was originally planning to have the Count land in Dover, the white chalk cliffs of Dover, to Whitby, because he was so anal and so organized with checking out the weather patterns from the books in the Coast Guard station. He wanted something realistic. So he palled up with these guys in the Coast Guard, and they told him about this ship, the Dimitri.
The Dimitri.
That came in under strange conditions and under full sail. In reality, it was a Russian crew that was drunk and they couldn't get the sails down. They came into the harbor and wrecked on the sand. What Bram did was he twisted that around and called it the Demeter. It came from Varna, which was, of course, Bulgaria, and it had Russian crew members on it. They weren't drunk. They were all killed by Dracula in the story. Yeah. But Bram made it realistic. And then, of course, he set everything exactly as laid out in that town. So we're going to go check out Whitby, and then up the coast in Scotland, where we found out Bram actually spent 11 of his summer holidays and wrote Dracula right in that little town. Wow. So we're going to check out all that. Hopefully, if it goes well, it's all going to be May 21st to the 27th. So we coincide with the 125th in the same place they wrote, a big celebration, big parties, and experiencetransylvania.com or experience/transylvania.com. It's on their website. Check it out. It should be fun.
That's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, it sounds amazing.
And just your comment about the research and the detail, that's the type of just books that I like to read, especially when it comes to fiction, because it adds this sense of reality to it, so that when you do go somewhere, you can be there, you can live in it. Ghostbusters Afterlife recently came out, and Dan Aykroyd was talking about when he wrote the original script for Ghostbusters, one of the things he wanted to do was put real science in there that at the time was kind of hot and happening. And he goes, and then everybody all of a sudden got into parapsychology, and in a way you can see, Bram kind of did the same thing. It got people interested in those areas to look at things. It got people interested in Vlad Dracul. It got all of these things because of real research based off of real things in real locations. And that makes such a massive difference, I feel, because it just grounds a story even more so, even in something as fictionalized as Dracula.
You are so right, and I'm glad you brought up the whole paranormal investigation, because when I do my talks, I actually, in a little bit of a joking form, I say, guys, do you know what was going on in England? Higher thinkers when Bram was writing this story, 1890 to 1897.
The spiritualist movement, man.
Absolutely. Spiritualism with its height. Bram was good friends, as I mentioned it earlier in the show, with Arthur Conan Doyle. J. Brodie Innes was a good friend of Bram's, who was a guy who split off from Freemasonry to Golden Dawn. Pamela Coleman Smith, she was the first artist to do the first Smith Waite tarot cards. So he was surrounded by people interested in the occult. Recently, an American master's student doing her research about the occult in England found 27 letters that Bram Stoker wrote to known experts of the occult, both before he wrote Dracula and after.
Oh, I'm sure there's something to the Fox sisters in there somewhere.
he is in there, guys.
That's fantastic.
This is not just, it's not happenstance. He had an interesting focus and a personal interest in what goes on with the spirit. And at that time, folks were like kind of tired with the old established religions just saying, look, you live a good life, you die, you go to heaven if you're good. You don't, you're going to hell. And any other mysteries, it's God's will. They want to know more than is God. They want to know what has happened to this. So they were seances, Houdini, as I said, Conan Doyle.
Yep.
This is why Bram Stoker's story resonated with, the spirits of the dead who are not in rest that Bram found in a Scottish lady's book called Land Beyond the Forest. Emily Gerard wrote this book. She was living in Transylvania, and it was all about restless spirits. Bram Stoker's friend, William Wilde, Oscar's older brother, introduced Bram to his mother, Lady Jane Wilde, who was the literati of Dublin, Ireland. She wrote a book about Irish folklore, and in that book, it said the similarities between Irish vampires and Transylvanian vampires are very similar. You must take a look at Emily Gerard's book. What do we find out? Bram, in the London Library, had checked out Emily Gerard's Land Beyond the Forest.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, Strigoi, Nosferatu, all that stuff.
He was in I thought I had it in my notes, but he was in a club, wasn't he? At Trinity that they were sort of into the parapsychology and things like that. Correct me. I know I'm going to be wrong. It's like the Philosophy Club, or
no, you're absolutely right. The Philosophical Society, and the Historical Society. More the Philosophical Society is just kind of like, thinking philosophically about life and death and spiritualism and everything. And he was the head of it. Yeah. So, and his advisor, Edward Dowden, who was also the head of the Philosophical Society at one point, he was a known expert of the occult. And Dowden's daughter, Esther, wrote a book on it. She was a well-respected medium and wrote a book about connecting with Oscar Wilde after he died. So you're absolutely right. Just the culture of Trinity College, of the Philosophical Society, of these higher thinkers, it was highly respected and sought after to just not take no for an answer and think, let's think about what the heck's going on in the world and in the afterlife, not just you're dead and buried.
And especially that time, so I'm obsessed with spiritualism. I host a paranormal podcast myself as well, and we've covered spiritualism a lot. And it was big in my family. My great grandmother was known as Mama Dragon, and she was a medium in central Michigan during that time period. My grandmother and her sisters were both mediums and things like that, and my sister is one as well. Now it's been passed down and things like that, so I've always been obsessed with that stuff, and so it's just absolutely fantastic to hear the connection there that I wasn't even really super aware of, and it makes me want to take a look at Dracula again through a different pair of eyes. So I'm really excited about that.
It is cool stuff, and I'll tell you what. It doesn't go too far out of my brain. You mentioned Lair of the White Worm, the last book Bram wrote. I know for a fact, and this is kind of sad, not to put a downer on it, but when you think of life and death and near the end of your life, Bram's son left notes in Trinity College that when he wrote The Lair of the White Worm, he had suffered his first stroke, and he was half the man that he was, but he did it as a favor to his publisher, who was trying to milk out of him one more, spiritualist, occult type story.
Yeah.
He had Dracula, in 1897, and now we're in the year 1910. Bram is not doing well. He had lost his job. Henry Irving died in 1904. He wasn't making, he didn't have any inheritance. He had no pension. He was struggling. And the publisher said, come on, you got one more in you. And he tried it. And so you were probably being very polite, Stefan, when you mentioned Lair the White Worm. Most people say, oh yeah, and it wasn't his best work. It is a very strange and
I love it. No, I love
work.
it.
But I think you love it because you get it.
Right. I like weird stuff too.
So. Yeah. No, that's cool.
Yeah.
But when you understand what the guy was going through, you get more out of it.
Yeah.
I get a lot out of Dracula when I know what was gone into it and what out of it. And when I read Lair, it was like, oh God, poor guy. Then I listened to it on Audible. I love to listen to them on Audible when I'm driving or something.
Yeah.
And I get more, another take on it. But it's just so sad to think of the suffering Bram was going through, physical ailment. He was losing sight in one eye, and he couldn't do all the research that he did for Dracula. So it wasn't a great book. And of course, Ken Russell turned it into a crazy movie, with the big stars. But nonetheless, that is a big part. That occult and spiritual is a big part of Bram's life, and it does come out in some of those stories.
Very cool, man. That's really cool. That was another thing. So my sister-in-law, she just accidentally stumbled upon the movie, like you were just talking about. She's like, "What am I watching right now?" And I was like, "Why?" She already does. She's not a huge horror fan already, but she just saw Bram Stoker, so she's thinking. And I was like, "Oh, I could have told you. You got to be ready for that one."
But I mean, Hugh Grant and Catherine Oxenberg.
It's a great cast.
And who's the other one? Come on, it's the lady with the fangs who was the Arabella. Oh man, well-known actress.
Oh, see, because now that you don't remember, I can't.
God, sorry. Yeah. Amanda Donoghue.
Thank you. God.
That's it. Okay. You channeled it. Thanks, man.
Dude, you know how it is. You know how it is with anything. If you would have said nothing, we'd have had it.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah.
But yeah, man, what a cool life. And I'm so thankful that you were able to find this and get this information out there to show us just the fun life, and the interesting thing, I know you had talked about, was this possible link to a childhood illness and bloodletting, and wondering how much of that influenced Dracula too. I mean, you talk about, we're seeing a lot more of it in movies, right? Is the bloodletting, because I think it was kind of this taboo thing people just didn't like to talk about, but now in historic movies, we're seeing a lot more of it. Yeah. And especially like you think about like Mary Brown, the America's First Vampire, like there was bloodletting that happened there and stuff like that. Do we know the childhood illness that required?
No, this is, I don't know if I'll take this one to my grave, but I'll give you what I think, okay? But I also have great respect for Dr. Loki Hess, who is a big-time researcher, and he's looking into this. He's trying to figure out what it could have been. And here's the skinny and all the facts that I've laid out. First of all, knowing where the Stokers lived for the first 6 or 7 years, right on Dublin Harbor, very musty, mildewy, wet and damp. Knowing that 2 other members of the family suffered from asthma and allergies, related to respiratory stuff. And knowing that Bram Stoker made this incredible recovery when they moved about 2 miles inland away from the musty, mildewy harbor. And he became this champion athlete at the age of 17. So from 0 to 7, very sickly, maybe never stood up, who knows. But somewhere around 8 or 9 got better, and then started physically walking for training. And then we don't know, was he in the weight room or what, but he ended up playing rugby at Trinity at 6'2", running, doing long distance race walking, gymnastics, as I said, rugby and rowing, all sports that require a very robust and healthy cardiovascular system. So it couldn't have been something that was like fairly common, these different diseases like scarlet fever, rheumatic fever, but it might have been something that Dr. Hess talks about, that, some kind of meningitis that sort of comes and goes. Yeah. I think, though, it was something related to asthma and respiratory allergies, because once they moved away from everything, he got better. And also, having been a coach myself and a teacher, I've seen many kids outgrow asthma. Now, then you asked the question about bloodletting. I'm also convinced, having found a treatise on bloodletting by one of Bram's relatives, and that guy's son who wrote it was alive and practicing bloodletting and other fever-related remedies when he was alive. So I put two and two together, and with a kind of a bit of a wink and a nod, saying, look, there's a really good chance this happened. And if it did, and if he was bloodlet, then it makes total sense when you read Dracula that there's two particular references to Dracula appearing like a gorged leech after a fresh meal of blood. Yeah. And so, yes, it would have been commonplace, but it would make more sense that young Bram was bled himself and therefore probably traumatized by the whole experience.
Oh, yeah, yeah, definitely.
Probably also helped him in some way when he wrote the scene in Dracula's castle about the women in white, much like the nurses that may have come to bloodlet him. Take his blood, and then he's too weak to escape. So I just think it's coincidental, yes, but it makes sense to me, guys. It makes sense that probably happened. And if so, God, lucky that guy survived, because when they take all this crap out of you, and not only that, but they rehydrate you with a mixture of red wine and oil. So you're not only dehydrated and traumatized by these bloody, cuttings or the leeches, but you're now drunk for a day or so as a young dehydrated kid.
Good Lord.
Come on.
Oh boy, Irish Catholic at its best.
Yeah.
Was it? This really wasn't in the in the journals, but we talked a little bit about Henry. I'm going to pronounce his last name wrong. Irving,
yeah.
Okay.
You got it.
But is it true that he didn't care much for Dracula?
This is one of these urban legends that, again, nobody really knows about. And let me tell you what was said, and I want you guys independently to give me your impression. So here's the skinny on it. Bram had to do a staged reading. So we know he only wrote one script, and it's a cut and paste out of two copies of Dracula cut on the pages. I've seen it. It sits in the British Museum with lots of little descriptions. One script only. There was 11 actors and actresses who were people from the Lyceum, not famous actors, just, bit players, some of the stage workers. On the stage, it had to be advertised, and there had to be a playbill, which there was, and registered with Lord Chamberlain's Copyright Office, which it was. And then it was simply just the script was passed on and read. It took 11 hours to do.
Yeah.
To read the whole damn book. So in the audience, there was two spectators, and that was part of the rules. So there's a good chance Bram paid somebody to come in from the street and sit there and watch it. Okay. It was not supposed to be a ticket selling event, but it was just to establish the copyright. Bram Stoker was sitting there, and apparently, this is what has been passed on in biographies, don't know how much is true. Henry Irving was sitting there for a little while, and at one point got up and said the word dreadful and walked out.
Yeah, that's exactly what I heard. Which is weird, because I've also heard that, and like I said, this is just from, this isn't coming from kind of the horse's mouth, like from the journals. But I've also read throughout the years that he actually wrote. It was either this. It's kind of what I've heard. He either wanted Irving to eventually portray Dracula in a stage play, or he based Dracula sort of on Irving.
Okay, I'm gonna just defer for just a second, because I think you're right on both cases, and let's go into that. But I want to go back to Dreadful for a moment, because I want you guys to give me your impression. If somebody says Dreadful, and you go back to 1897, do you think it's possible that he said it's full of dread, like it's dreadful,
right?
As opposed to, oh, this sucks. Okay, it's dreadful. It's dreadful. That's a possibility to bounce off you guys. The other one is, Henry Irving is not going to sit through 11 hours of something and then walk out and say dreadful. He probably was there for an hour or maybe half an hour, and all he's got is people reading one script on the stage. No wonder he's not going to like it, because there's no acting going on. So to me, this has been blown out of proportion. And I simply raised the question to you two by saying, if it's possible that it was full of dread, or I'm bored, I'm not going to sit here, I got a date, he's going to bug out. It's been blown out of proportion that Henry Irving hated it. Yeah. But so what do you think about that for a moment before I answer your two questions, Valentin?
Well, I mean, immediately you think of texting someone, right? How much stuff gets taken out of context?
Oh, my Lord.
Simply reading it. But I mean, at this point, there were already penny dreadfuls that were going on. So dreadful was known as a sort of fiction at that point. So he could have been saying, this is a dreadful. Right. This is a type of penny dreadful, but since it's 11 hours, it's more of $1.50 dreadful. But
well, honestly, much like Bram, reading the journals, not to go on another little tangent here, but reading the journals kind of shed some light for me on Irving, because what I had collected throughout the years is Irving, like I'd even heard to the extent like he based Dracula so much on Irving, like Bram felt like he was Renfield, but honestly, from the journals, it sounds like they had a pretty good relationship. So I don't know.
No, listen. They had a great relationship. Bram, idolized him, and Irving also realized that he wasn't going to be anywhere unless Bram Stoker did I have the organizational skills, the mathematics skills to do everything right. But I don't want to go too far. Going back to, I totally believe that either consciously or unconsciously, a big part of the persona of Bram's Count Dracula was the physical stature of Irving, as well as that sort of emotional, demanding person. But the other thing people overlook is that Irving played the role of Mephistopheles, the devil, on stage in the play Faust for years, leading up to Bram then writing the book. So I believe you've got the Irving persona on stage, the Irving persona off stage, and I also believe that Bram had, and it's not written anywhere, this is just, again, unsolicited, you did not a lot of backup, but I believe Bram was hoping that Irving would the Bram would be able to put this book on stage. Yeah. He protected the dramatic rights because he was a shrewd businessman and he knew how to do that. He did it with some of his other books as well. So he would have had plans to do it. And so the book gets published in 1897. They've got lots of other things going on. Irving dies in 1904. It never goes on stage anywhere during Bram's life. Bram dies in 1912, but he has done something incredibly well. He's protected the dramatic rights. When he dies, his wife is in a bit of a tough pickle with money, but luckily Bram's eldest brother, who helped him write the medical parts of Dracula, Sir Thornley Stoker, helped him do all the medical stuff. He left a good amount of money for Florence. And then she was able to capitalize on the dramatic rights because she got Hamilton Dean and John Balderston to create the right play.
Yeah.
She got money for that. And when they sold those dramatic rights to Universal in 1931 for the Todd Browning movie, she got $40,000.
Yeah.
So she did well. And it's all because Bram Stoker had the shrewd awareness to protect those dramatic rights, even though he never valued from them himself.
Yep.
What were her thoughts? I'm sorry, but I just you would probably know and better than anyone else. What were her feelings? Because we all know the story about Nosferatu, how they had to change it, blah blah blah. But how did she feel about the Browning Lugosi film? Did that ever been recorded? How she felt about it?
You know, great question, because I've done a ton of research on her 2.5-year battle against Piranha Films, with the Independent Authors Society, to essentially prosecute them on a copyright infringement. She was obviously very happy to have the play turned into a film done properly. What was strange, though, many people don't get this, is that when Piranha Films said, "You've got to pay Mr. Stoker a bunch of money because this is proved to be a copyright infringement," they said, "Sorry, I'm bankrupt, we can't do it." They said, "Okay, then you're going to have to destroy all copies of the film." There were already copies of the film spread around the world. Because they were already being previewed and so on. She was paranoid, and I've seen the letters, that even after she won judgment, not all the countries of the world had signed the Berne Convention recognizing copyright law, that while her play was being successful and making money, she was hoping to sell the movie rights, and she thought that the presence of this pirated film would detract from the value of her movie rights, because it was already out there for free.
Yeah.
So she was very nervous about that and tried to do something about it, but she couldn't. Luckily, it didn't deter Universal. They apparently bought a copy of Nosferatu, either just to get it off the market or to study it. But to answer your question, this is long-winded, Lance.
Oh no, I was loving it.
There's nothing written that says, "Oh, I love the way it was portrayed," or "I love the movie." It was more, she was a stickler to get things done legally and right. Yeah. And I think it was a massive relief to her that she could capitalize properly and legally on the dramatic rights, both film and stage, and be done with it. She wasn't a lady that wanted to mess with that stuff, but she needed to for her own survival.
Dacre, I wanted to ask you one more question before we get out of here. I want to be respectful of your time. We are getting close to wrapping up, but I did want to mention your fiction books here first. We mentioned them at the top of the show. And, being the official sequel and prequel of Dracula is pretty high honor. My question is to you is how much did you try to base your work off of the style of Bram, or did you just try to do your own thing, or did you try to copy that literary style for those books?
I'm glad you said that, because when Ian Holt and I first wrote Dracula the Undead, and it came out in 2009, we had no style to copy because we were rookie writers. We had a friend of his who was a historic researcher, and we got another friend who was a good editor. And then when Dutton Publishing bought it, they applied, their professional editor. Mm-hmm. So I thought we had a hell of a good story. We had good research to put everything in the right place, just like Bram did, all these realistic places. But we were actually very concerned about, we want to be looked at as being a sequel, but we're not good enough writers to write in the epistolary style. That was just above our pay grade at the time. We just didn't know how to do it well enough. And I'll tell you something, I took a lot of heat for it, because even though it took a while, but it became an international bestseller. people have now come to really love it and realize,
I love it, yeah.
You know, it's a cool story, but I learned enough, but because of the criticism that it was not written in the same style that Bram wrote Dracula, that when I got J.D. Barker to write Dracul with me, that came out in 2018, we made darn sure that we were going to write the prequel to Dracula in the epistolary style. And it's challenging, guys. I mean, it's like juggling like crazy. You've got different characters' viewpoints. They all have to mesh up together at just the right time. But my God, I'm happy we did, because it was a huge success. And film rights have been purchased by Paramount. And it's really put me on the map. And I feel really, really good about it, that I now have, you know, the prequel and the sequel that have got, you know, people have given an honest look, and we were, you know, got some awards for it. It was the #1 horror hardcover in England, which is a tough market to crack. And, you know, that's pushed me on to do, you know, other cool stuff.
Yeah, well, I love it. I remember the hoopla of when the Undead came out. It was a big deal. I stood in line at a bookstore to grab it. I was so excited. And I love it, and Dracul, and I'm just fascinated. We love the Lost Journals. Like, just you have some fans here on Misters of the Dark, Dacre, man, and we are so thankful, man, just for you, not just taking your time, but for continuing to do your work and you know, trying to make sure the world gets as much Bram love as possible.
You're doing the Dark Lord's work.
That's it. And seriously, guys, I appreciate it. You know, for people to give these books, you know, an honest look. It is big shoes to fill. For sure. Bram Stoker's shoes are, you know, an international book that's never been out of print, you know, public domain. It's incredible story, Dracula, and trying to like stand up and at least do my bit to continue the story, give people insight into early in the story. I thank you guys for looking at it that way. Thank you for having me on the show. And, you know, means a lot to be able to sort of, in a nice, relaxed atmosphere, talk freely about it. And have a good time. So appreciate that, guys.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up here, I just wanted to give you that opportunity to let people know where they can find you or things that you're wanting to share. This is that opportunity to let our listeners know.
Well, the first thing to do is go to you know, BramStokerEstate.com is a website that my wife and I run. Very factual stuff, but also, you know, all my books are on there. The Bram Stoker bobblehead that I've created is on there as well on the lighter side. And then DacreStoker.com talks about, you know, the books, obviously, but also the trips I take and experience-Transylvania.com is the website of the company that I do the tours with. If you're interested in kind of following the footsteps of Bram, check out these tours. Hopefully everything will be good next year with the pandemic to be able to travel. But, you know, May 21st to 27th is when we're going to hit the British Isles, and then later on in the year, Transylvania. So, thank you guys. Follow me on Facebook. I'm very approachable, as you can tell, and I love to meet people at all the conventions that I go to, which is, you know, pretty much the big ones.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dacre Stoker.
Thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome on our show anytime. Anytime you got anything else you want to push and promote, we'll be sharing, because, like I said, big fans, and it's been an absolute pleasure, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen. You guys have a great evening.
Woo-wee! And with that, dear friends, we come to the end of another delightfully disturbing episode of Misters of the Dark. As always, thank you for listening. Thank you to the Fearscape Media Network, and thank you to Corey Adams and Ashley Jones Adams from Nothing Wrong for our musical theme.
Journal continued. As usual, my brother took over the entire interview with Mr. Stoker.
Lord.
Hardly let me get a word in, only to pontificate and exacerbate his own arrogant and self-indulgent agenda.
Pontificate? Exacerbate? Really? You don't even know what those words mean, Lance. Mr. Stoker, I'm afraid I must ask you to leave, for what is about to happen next is not for anybody with a weak stomach. But before we go, dear friends, I will leave you with this. Write hard and clear about what hurts. Good night.
Journal continued. I've just been decapitated by Stefan. Mim. Need to learn how to reattach own head.